again. Welcome to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the unified voice of the AICPA and CIMA. Every week here on the show, we share insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever part of the profession you are in, and wherever you happen to be. Talking of location, from our UK office in the heart of the City of London, I'm Karl Hannon. This week, we'll be looking at how CFOs are transforming their finance teams for the digital world. And we're joined by a returning guest, Aubrey Joachim. Aubrey will provide us with some new understandings of exactly which skills need to be fused together so finance leaders can successfully transform their teams for the digital world that we're now all in. We'll also be talking about how finance professionals are becoming data scientists. We'll look at the road ahead for emerging CFOs, particularly at what the finance leaders of tomorrow need to be learning today. Plus, we'll share some resources and some tools that CFOs can use to assess themselves and their teams, and they can understand how all of this applies to the digital world. Let's say hello to our guest again. Different time zones, different parts of the world where we're talking about the same topic. Aubrey, for someone who hasn't encountered you, perhaps through the AICPA or your previous work with CIMA in the past, give us a quick introduction of who you are and what you do and how it connects with the profession.
Thank you, Karl, and thank you for having me once again. Just to tell you where I am, I'm right now in Sydney, Australia, and that's where I live. And I could actually give you a global digital locator, but I'd rather not do that now to confuse everyone. Just to paint a quick picture of who I am, I like to think of myself as a finance professional who has always tried to keep myself ahead of the game, in the context of where the finance function and the finance professional is heading. When I was a global president of CIMA about 10 or 11 years ago, the theme I set for my year of presidency was relevance. I think this should be a perpetual theme for any finance professional. Today, as we find ourselves in an ever-changing digital world, the need for our function to be relevant is stronger than ever. As one of the most connected past presidents of CIMA, I continue to remain connected to the finance community as a global trainer, speaker, influencer, and mentor. I travel the world, pre-COVID of course, talking to many finance professionals around the world. I now do that in a virtual format.
You did mention the theme of relevance, so that, I think, ties very nicely into why you've joined us again for this episode of the podcast. As I said, this episode is called How CFOs Are Transforming Their Finance Teams for the Digital World. And we've picked that theme because you've been talking about this very thing to audiences in the work you're doing in your part of the world, both online and in person. So what have you learned from some of those conversations?
It's very interesting because talking to various parties across the digital divide, so to speak, and across the world, I hear many different views of it. I not only talk to finance professionals, but I also closely follow what's happening in discussion forums as well as research material from organizations such as CIMA, the AICP, as well as other organizations. I also follow thought leaders in this space. My daily dose of emails is full of interesting insights that I pick up, and then I relate that to what finance professionals should be doing. So what I'm learning is that there is no turning the clock back in this space. And more importantly, the digital shift is accelerating at pace. In fact, I would say that it is too fast for CFOs, finance professionals, and even finance bodies that are, in my opinion, playing catch up today. Right? The pace of Industrial Revolution 4 is much faster than we have seen in previous phases. Traditional and even current CFOs and finance professionals who are fixed in their thinking and attitudes, not to mention lack of knowledge, would I say, are really dragging their feet on driving the change required. Meanwhile, the business, through business managers, are demanding much more from their CFOs and finance professionals. In my opinion, it will take an entire generation of new finance professionals to pick the baton and take off. CIMA was in fact the first accounting body to change its professional qualification syllabus to incorporate the digital shift. Of course, there are a few CFOs who are recognizing the writing on the wall, but I suspect they are faced with the challenges of bringing their staff along with them. That's where the chains are being dragged.
And that's where we pick up the conversation, I think. And this is something that's on the mind of many people at all levels in leadership in organizations. But of course, it goes right down to the people who are having to implement the technological changes, perhaps the coders, perhaps people in the technical teams. Of course, this relates to, in many cases, CTOs as well. But the fact is, no matter what role we're in and where we work, we can all access information about what's happening out there, about how the pandemic is forcing practices to change, how it's transforming processes. And of course, we can see all around us how it's changing teams, the staff, the people, our colleagues. Give us a sense of how finance teams have been most affected by the pandemic.
I do not want to see the issue of the pandemic muddy the waters around this whole discussion on digital disruption. Digital disruption has actually been closer than the horizon even pre-pandemic. However, the connection that I will bring in here is where the pandemic has actually forced some processes within finance teams as well as across other parts of the business to move to digital platforms faster than they would have otherwise. Finance business processes and models have changed to take into consideration the effects of the pandemic. And therefore, the way finance professionals are dealing with the rest of the business, with the rest of the world, so to speak, is changing. And I think, in a way, the pandemic has done a lot of good, not only to finance professionals, but to the whole world, I think, because it has made the whole place accelerate. It is said that even there has been an economic reset of the clock. So, in the context of finance professionals, I think we are seeing a lot of good to come out of it, so to speak. And that's how I look at what the pandemic has done to the finance function.
It's survival of the fittest as well as survival of the fastest. Let's go beyond those pandemic headlines, as you suggested. How's the profession been changing anyway, and how long has this actually been going on?
Really, when you sit down and think about it, the finance profession has been on a change trajectory for quite some time. In my reckoning, at least 4 to 5 decades, if not longer. The early changes were mostly around enhancing processes and driving efficiencies, with some early technological inventions like the advent of personal computing, which arrived in the early 80s, I would say. However, over the years, technology enhancements based on Moore's law has seen significant increases in computing power. Finance transformation needed to accelerate to keep up with technology and the ensuing demands of business, which are growing by the day. Funnily enough, businesses seem to be ahead of where finance is, and finance always is playing catch up. And I'm a little disappointed, in fact, as a finance professional, that we are playing that catch-up game always. Fortunately, I would think that in this current day and age, that gap between the leaders and where finance is getting closer and closer. So the demands on the finance function by the business brought about the need for finance transformation to focus on shifting their traditional mindsets and behaviors. And that's where we talk of finance professionals now becoming business partners and things like that. Therefore, it's pretty clear that even from 40 to 50 years ago, finance transformation considered the aspects of technology and behaviors. In the next few years, the move towards technologies such as quantum computing and things like that, which makes computing much, much faster, finance transformation will have to progress at an even greater pace. And I can't wait for that to happen, because that's where we should be.
The place we're in now is in a digital world. And that reminds me, why don't we say digital era?
The two descriptors are used interchangeably. Personally, I like the use of digital world rather than the digital era. See, when you talk about an era, It describes a particular period of time rather than a fundamental and continuous change. Say we talk about the Roman era, and it was a particular period of time. In my opinion, the digital world is a permanent and continuous change that humanity will have to embrace and live with. I doubt there will be an end point to the digital expanse growing. I mean, it'll go beyond our world, I would think, right? And therefore, I doubt there will be any chances that the pace of change will lessen. In fact, it will enhance further and further. And with various advances in technology and digital mindsets driving human endeavors. So therefore, I think, as I discussed a few minutes ago, in the context of the pace of change, I am more convinced that talking about it as a digital world is a more appropriate descriptor than digital era.
Let's go to the heart of our conversation and talk about CFOs, Chief Financial Officers. What do you identify as possibly one of the biggest changes that will lie ahead for CFOs? And then what would you say is driving that change?
Well, I think the biggest change that I see around the corner is where finance professionals are actually becoming data scientists. Because of the growing importance of big data and analytics and visualizations supported by technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, etc., I'm forcing the demise of the traditional finance professional. In fact, we have been seeing that for some time. All the accounting bodies have recognized that, and they are pushing their members to get beyond that end point. We don't want to be the dinosaurs of the business world, and therefore, we have to evolve into data scientists. I mean, we live in a world of data, we're talking of a digital world, and therefore, the natural progression for accountants is to become data scientists. In fact, we have been playing around with data for a long time as accountants. So there you are. That's where I think the big change is going to be.
It's interesting that you say that accountants and finance professionals have been playing in the world of data for a long time anyway. So even though we're saying now it's a data-first world, data and information has been the bedrock of the profession. So actually, it's not that massive a mind shift as some people may think. The profession has a history of learning how to gain information, then evaluating what that information informs them about the businesses that they are working either in or to assist with as business partners. So the pace of change may be accelerating massively in the technologies that are available to the profession are changing, but they are used to working with data. So there are definitely changes ahead though. So how do the CFOs of tomorrow, or those that are currently in role and intend to be in those roles for a considerable period of time still, how would they prepare themselves and their teams for this new way of operating through this data-first world?
Like you said, I mean, finance professionals have been dealing with data for a long, long time. Right, ever since Pacquioli came up with double entry bookkeeping, the accountants have been, charged with the responsibility of managing organizational data. However, unfortunately, finance professionals consider data in isolation, right? The challenge faced by CFOs and their finance function is how best to correlate data from mere consequential financial data with other organizational or indeed the huge volumes of external data available to organizations. So this data explosion also means that such data can be used to project more reliable and accurate financial positions rather than just only look at historical financial outcomes, which we have always been doing. This phenomenon is perhaps the most challenging for traditional CFOs, and finance professionals have to grapple, as they've always done, right, with having to look back at historical financial figures rather than confidently projecting future financial positions. This is where the finance function has to reinvent itself for the digital world. In my opinion, there are three key digital drivers that CFOs must address when they are preparing themselves and their team for the digital world, right? And those three key, digital drivers are this. Firstly, basic digital literacy, right? And we'll look at what that is, I'm sure, right? Second, awareness of emerging technologies, right? And there are several emerging technologies. And again, the pace of those emerging technologies are taking off. Third, and the most important in my mind, would be the mindset and behavioral change. How do we now recognize how to live in this whole digital world? So those are the challenges that CFOs are grappling with.
So you mentioned the three: basic digital literacy, the awareness of emerging technologies, and then the most important, the mindset and the behavioral changes, which I think we will go through in a little more detail in a minute. Let me just go back to something, in fact, a name you mentioned. For people who may not be familiar with that name, Pacioli, or Fra Luca Bartolomeo di Pacioli, I think, often referred to just as Luca Pacioli. He's an Italian mathematician who is generally seen as the father of accounting and bookkeeping. He was born in Italy, 1445. He brought out a mathematics book, and that was the very first book to include information about double entry bookkeeping, which is why he's often referred to as the father of accounting. And the anniversary of the release of that book was mid-November in 1494, which is why International Accounting Day is generally celebrated on November 10th every year to this date. So you did mention his name. For people who may not know why Pacioli is so important, we hope we've cleared that up. All right, let's clear up some other drivers of what's happening in the profession today, looking at the first of those three drivers that CFOs must address when preparing themselves and their teams for the digital world. You started with basic digital literacy. What does that mean in the context of finance transformation, and why is it important for a CFO and their team?
Well, I think that's the fundamental basic that finance professionals who may not consider themselves technical and things like that would have to get into, right? So the digital world is different from anything that we have been familiar with. And that's the big challenge. So if I were to offer an analogy, it is like talking about cassette era music to the age of Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. So starting with the chain of events, the way in which basic information is captured has shifted from the movement of paper documents to the digital environment's dynamic capture by way of sensors, the Internet of Things, etc. So next, the way in which the digital world information is treated is very different from the mere physical paper era. And today we are talking of technologies like cloud storage and digital transfers and all that, and the creation of content, right? And as well as similarly the sharing or communicating of such information is very different. The creation of content from physical historical reports to digital dynamic or real-time reports and visualizations, right? Interactive visualizations. The need to ensure the integrity of such information is also paramount. So the future might bring about even more technically enhanced developments. Some of these shifts are challenging the comprehension of some of the finance community. Therefore, the CFOs have the difficult task of helping their teams with comprehending these changes. And dare I say, some of the traditional CFOs themselves will have to unlearn and relearn things, right, as we go along, if they are going to take their teams along with them on this journey into the digital world, right? It's like Alice in Wonderland to most people, right? That's the way I see it. So that's some of the challenges.
You mentioned that CFOs will have to relearn, unlearn, and I think it's pretty clear, especially with your second driver, which was the awareness of emerging technology. CFOs are generally not IT experts. They may have teams of people who are, but they themselves are not. So how would a CFO be able to become more aware of these emerging technologies?
Right. Now this shouldn't be something that will scare them. So I'm not suggesting that CFOs and their teams evolve into code writing data engineers, software engineers, or computer engineers assembling hardware and servers and networks and things like that. No. We are not talking of that. Finance professionals have always been using things like Excel and PowerPoint and Word and all of that. Now, some of them may be using Power BI and things like that, and similar software without understanding the algorithmic code that lies behind the surface. So they didn't need to understand technology. What is expected of CFOs and their finance teams in the digital world, at least at this current point in time, is merely an understanding of the difference between, the storing of data and the retrieving of data from a hard drive on their own computers to storing such data on a physically distant remote storage device, which we call cloud today via the internet. Or to recognize that a simple Excel macro can indeed be enhanced to run an automated process at a designated point in time and therefore become a robotic process. Similarly, how simple instructions can be written in Excel to recognize a certain pattern and then perform a task. So things like that. And then to have an understanding of things like the shifting basic core technologies that are around. So we talk of things like the core modernizations that are changing, cloud, the emergence of cloud, of process robotics, of visualizations. And then people talk of things that are changing, the exponentials, what sits above those core modernizations, advanced analytics, cognitive computing, in-memory computing, blockchain, and the likes. Okay? So therefore, this course for the next generation of finance professionals who not only has excellent finance skills, but may have to acquire some basic knowledge of the technologies that are available. And I'm coming across some finance professionals who've gone beyond just that. And many finance professionals today are getting into other fields and other fields of study, doing things like data science courses and things like that, some of which are even, I think, available on the CGMA website, looking at data and analytics courses. So all that is possible. So that is all that is required of a CFO and his or her team, not to become technocrats, so to speak. So fear not, CFOs.
Yeah, and as you say, we don't need to know about all the technologies that we're making use of. It's very like me when I'm on the motorway or the freeway, as people may call it in other parts of the world. I don't understand the mechanics going on under the bonnet, but all I need to do is understand the rules of the road, understand how everyone else is driving, and most importantly, align with their speed and direction so I stay on the journey safely and get to where I need to get to without being caught up in any unnecessary incidents or bottlenecks. So we're talking about digital disruptors, and you've taken us through two of the three that you mentioned. We've got to the one that you said was in your mind the most important, and it is all about minds, about mindsets and behavioral changes. And to me, that sounds like a bit of a minefield. So we're talking about CFOs and their teams. How does a CFO guide themselves and the team that they're transforming through what seems to be a very tricky part of this transformational process?
You are right in describing it as a tricky part, because machines follow what you say. They will follow some algorithmic code. Try that with humans, and it can be a real challenge. So therefore, the tricky part of the transformation has to do with changing ingrained learning and behavior. That's why, all of us are talking of this whole unlearn, relearn, come up with new creative thinking, etc. So having worked through the basic digital shifts and the enabling technologies, the challenge then is to understand how the two in combination can and must change outcomes of not only how and what finance does, but more importantly, how the changes can influence the organization to perform better. So that's where we have to ride this wave of disruption and technology and stuff like that in order to perform better and add more value to organizations. To use another sort of music analogy, it's like moving from using a CD stacker to play a combination of songs, as we once did, or we kept changing the record player, to now creating a Spotify playlist of songs, right? So we have all that capability to do that. So the mindset changes, we can do this in a different way. So the challenge for CFOs and the finance team is to exercise creative, critical thinking and imagination, to recognize that data analytics can be used to predict outcomes and therefore drive things like dynamic budgeting and forecasting, or that real-time data capture and recording and reporting does away with the need for period-end reporting. I really feel the time of month-end and period-end reporting is coming to an end. Also, that lengthy and convoluted reports, as we accountants are very good at producing, can be created into smart visualizations. Just think of that change. And not just this one-sided recognition of such shifts, but developing the confidence and the ability to convince the other side of the business to buy into such concepts. So we can actually be leaders, holding the hands of others and taking them as well on this journey in the digital world. Collectively, all of these mindset and behavioral changes manifest into transforming finance professionals into digitally effective finance business partners. That's where I'm heading. That's where my view is taking me.
It's all very well to talk about the digital world, but we're still in a human world, a people world. We have to make sure we take people with us as finance leaders on that journey. And I understand that these three skills you've talked about are really important when driving the transformation of a finance team. And just to recap, you talked about digital basics, there's technology awareness, and there's mindset and behavioral change. Then I have to ask the question about whether there's a way that a CFO can assure themselves, have the confidence that they've got all of these things in place so that they've got the best chance of succeeding on this journey that they're trying to map out. When they're leading their teams and tying all of this together into a period of profound change, is there a way that the CFO can assess themselves and their teams before they actually start the journey?
Oh, of course, certainly. I mean, CFOs have been very good at that, telling other parts of the business what they have to do and setting KPIs and, project plans and all that type of thing. So that's exactly what CFOs should do. They must first chart out a digital transformation journey, as I would call it, which includes self-assessment gap analysis to identify how they and their finance teams need to be trained. So an ideal aid to doing this is the CIMA Finance Business Partner Skill and Competency Matrix, which examines not only the required technical skill sets, but also the soft skills and behavioral skills which bring all the three facets together. So this tool can be used to carry out self-assessments at any point in time. Therefore, CFOs can carry out such assessment at the start of the digital transformation journey and then progressively carry out assessments and track progress towards achievement of their expected goals. And therefore, they can show the rest of the business as well how they are progressing. That is where I think CFOs should take the lead.
Once we know we've started well, the chances of ending well will be much improved, which is positive, which is excellent, which also takes us to the end of our conversation. Are there any resources that you would recommend? You did mention the CIMA Finance Business Partner Skills and Competency Matrix, but there are other resources out there, aren't there?
Of course there are. I mean, there are a number of very interesting programs and workshops and webinars and all that on the CGMA website as well, CGMA, CIMA, AICPA website. But there are also a number of CIMA research documents on the future of finance, reinventing finance for a digital world, as well as a very good CGMA document on finance business partnering, which is entitled Building a Better Business. So together, they all form a very good set of learning documentation, so to speak. There is also an AICPA document entitled Agile Finance Revealed. Besides, there are a number of webinars and courses like I mentioned. However, as I always tell finance professionals, read your regular magazine of your institute. They contain a wealth of knowledge that will keep you informed. A regular browsing of a web is also a good source. And for a very interesting overview of the future of technology, I strongly recommend you follow thought leaders in this space. And, Bernard Ma is one person who comes to mind, and he's a very interesting person, and I get regular updates from him as to what is happening in that space.
Good. Talking of thought leaders, where can people catch up with you online or in real life?
Thank you for promoting me as a thought leader. Yes, I like to think I'm a thought leader. In fact, many things I've thought about, many years ago are now coming to fruition. So anyway, in the next few weeks, I'll be doing a number of things. I mean, I do a lot of training all over, but specifically in the CIMA world, I'll be doing a webinar on reinventing the finance for the digital world for CIMA in Sri Lanka, which is also being, put out to other parts of the APAC, the Asia Pacific region. Also, towards the end of October, my 2 CGMA webinars on dynamic budgeting and forecasting will be broadcast to the APAC region and I suppose in other parts of the world as well. I hope many of you will be interested in these topics. I'm also doing a number of virtual events for other professional bodies across the globe, so you might come across my name if you were to Google it or something like that. I would also like to think that new business models would have replaced what we know in the pre-pandemic era. And what I can definitely say is that all of you can follow me on LinkedIn to engage with me on a more personal level if there's anything you want to share with me or discuss or get my opinions and views on. Just look me up, Aubrey Joachim, and I'm pretty sure that I'm the only such person on LinkedIn.
I'm glad we are catching up with the one and only Aubrey Joachim here on the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. Aubrey, while we ask all our guests the same final question, I'm expecting a unique answer from you. We always ask our guests to imagine that we've given them the chance to design an imaginary Go Beyond Disruption t-shirt. So if you were to print one sentence on the front of this imaginary t-shirt, a sentence that delivers a very simple message for a listener to take away from our conversation today, what would the front of your t-shirt say?
Oh, okay. Right. Why not to ride the wave of disruption without fear? And I can give you one for the back of the t-shirt as well.
What's on the back?
Don't be left behind. I'm riding the wave of disruption.
It sounds like we'll need a fancy graphic, obviously computer generated because we are in the digital world. We'll have to leave it there, but as we've said, our show notes will have links to all the resources that Aubrey's talked about. And a quick note, if you are a listener new to the podcast, you can view these show notes really easily. All you have to do is click on the episode's info icon on whatever podcast app that you're using. It'll work on your smartphone or your tablet. You can also open the episode in your computer's web browser and you'll find everything right there, especially the CIMA Finance Business Partner Skills and Competency Matrix that Aubrey referenced. For more on turning disruption into opportunity using what we've talked about today, visit the new portal at future.aicpa.org. You'll find courses, webinars, and other professional development resources there, a useful mix of free and paid for resources, so go and have a browse. And if you're browsing previous episodes of this podcast, you'll find all of them at gobeyonddisruption.com. You can also comment on our shows. You can share episodes with your own networks and get all future episodes automatically as they're released completely free. Just follow us on your music platform or app of choice. Thanks again to our guest, Aubrey Joachim, and of course, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, go tell someone about it. We'd love to know what you thought of it and give us a sense of what you'd like to hear more of as well. You can use the feedback link in the show notes. From the office of AICPA and CIMA in the heart of the City of London, I'm Karl Hannon. We'll be back soon with more guests and more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, keep listening and keep safe. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at aicpa-cima.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein, and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.